If you weren't here last week, we introduced this new graphic. Isn't it incredible? Like the way our team brings that together. You've got the trolley car, the cityscape, and the fog. I didn't even notice the fog till I'd watched it a few times. That's how focused I am. All of that comes from inside our church, which is super cool. And as we start part 2 of the God in the City series, a few things I want to get to before that, just some housekeeping things for our church and things going on in this community and around the world. Many of you have seen how hard the Philippines have been hit by the typhoon lately. Very surprisingly, we have a super diverse church, people from all over, but we really have many people in our congregation here who have a strong and deep affinity for the Philippines. So like Dave Yap, who's running our words from the back of the house this morning, he actually is from the town where this thing hit. Dulce, he was in our first service. Francis, who's working in our kids area, and a number of you in this room that I don't know all the particular stories. So it's not just that there's something in the world and we need to do something, it's that there's something in the world affecting our own Epic community, not just San Franciscans, but one of the beauties with us being such a diverse and even international congregation living in that type of city is that when things go on around the world, it's not just a USA Today type thing for us. It actually hits our community in really personal ways. So Tim will tell you guys at the end, he'll lead us in a prayer at the end of our service and also tell you how Epic's going to try to make a dent monetarily speaking and just to be able to help with the aid that's going to be offered and is already in place there. Secondly, I told you guys the last couple of weeks, we've reached unprecedented numbers in our kids ministry, which has been awesome. So if you haven't been around the last 2 weeks, we've had 50 or more kids the last 2 Sundays. That's a lot of kids, right? And you're like, well, I don't know, Ben, how many did you have before? Well, we started like 8. And they were all staff kids pretty much. And so we've had new families come into our church. We've had people get married and have babies. We have people who were married and have babies. And so some of us are adopting. There's a lot of things going on in our church that has provided that growth and as our church has grown overall. But all of you are very smart people. And so I know when in your organizations and in your companies, when things begin to grow, what do you have to do? You got to staff that thing, right? So a unique need, but also opportunity. I hope you see it as an opportunity, but if you see it as a need, I'll let you off the hook with that too, okay? We need some of you who aren't serving currently in our church in some fashion or form. We need you to step up and start serving in our Epic Kids ministry starting today. Now, you don't have to leave the room today. I just mean we need you to let us know today. The communication card, which is our standard way we allow you to communicate what's going on in your life, prayer requests, how you give your offering, those kind of things. On the bottom right side of that envelope, there's a white box. And you wouldn't be committing yourself to anything particular today other than just saying, I'm interested in helping with kids. And then Rachel, who's our kids director, will be in touch with you about that. Guys, let me just say this. Part of the DNA of Epic is selfless service. It is how this thing got off the ground. And I believe if we're going to continue to see God move in our church community, we're going to continue to have to step up. Now, we have many volunteers serving at Epic. Over a month's time, we have about 208 people on our volunteer roster. And what happens over a month at Epic, though we have about 340 people every Sunday, throughout a month, we have well over 600 different individuals who attend our church. And so that's great. It's a great percentage, but we're going to continue to have to step that up. I never want to be the pastor, even if this thing gets really big, where 20% of us cover everything. Okay, so I'm not asking those of you that are already deep in another ministry of our church to jump over into kids too. I'm asking some of you who aren't serving in a consistent way right now to be willing to step up and serve in kids. There's all kind of ways you can do that. Rachel will communicate that, but just know we have 3 age groups right now, so really 4. We have the birth to 2-year-old group, then we have a preschool group, then we have kindergarten through 5th grade, and then we now have a middle school. We're in the first fall of that session. We really don't need any more middle school workers. We're great in our ratio there, but we do need some people to step up in Epic Kids. There's a lot of ways to serve every week. You can be a lead teacher in the room. You can be an assistant teacher. You can be a person who hangs out in the lobby and does check-in. But what I'm saying to you is this is, and you're like, Ben, is this your pastor heart or your dad heart? It's both. Okay? I've got 3 kids, hopefully soon to be 4 in the next few months. No, she's not pregnant. Are you? No. Okay. It's like, believe in miracles, but And so I want to say that to all of you. If you'd be willing to at least have a conversation with Rachel this week about it, would you just write that on your communication card? We want to be a church. We don't want to go, you know what, we don't have a place for your... And just so you know, some of you are like, oh, I just don't know, Ben. I just like coming to worship and just sitting and consuming. We'll talk to you about that in a second. But let me just ask you this. Do you want to sit and consume with 50 of them in here? I mean, because we can bring them all, we can just do a parade right now if you want to know if that would keep you from being distracted. So, hey, if you're willing to, and some of you are like, and then so you have two people, right, in this room along the kids line. Some of us are already parents, and so there's obvious reasons, like Ben, I only come to church to get the hour break. I don't like the messages. I don't really like the music, but the hour of free childcare, awesome. All right, so if that's you, serve in a different area that your kids maybe aren't in, okay? Like serve in a different age group, and then you'll be thankful that your kid isn't a baby anymore. Or serve with the older kids, and you're like, oh, I'm thankful my kid's not there yet. Whatever it is. But also there are tons of single people and young couples who serve, both men and women who serve in our Epic Kids ministry. And so I just want to say, Rachel or someone representing her will be at the table when the service ends. But just from my heart to you, I don't use this line a lot, but I want to use the platform God's given me this morning to say to you, friends, let's step up and serve these kids. You can do something, okay? You can do something. There's applications when you leave the room this morning on that back table, and we can all step up. And thirdly, what I want to do before we get into this week's message is just introduce, I've got a great co-teacher with me this morning. Give it up for the one and only Shauna Pilgreen. I may do this every week. Like, my Saturday was so relaxed yesterday. Like, memorizing half the message is awesome. And so... Yeah, well, we can't pay you. That's right. Her Saturday was terrible, but I got to watch more football than normal yesterday. It was really great. We're continuing in this God in the City series, and I want to lead off by just asking you the question. Don't answer out loud unless you think it's really fun, but why are you in San Francisco? My guess is there are as many reasons in this room as there are people, and a few of them might be some of these. You work in the technology sector, and so it makes perfect sense. Where else would you go for that? Anybody billionaire because of Twitter's IPO this week? Millionaire? We're just trying to estimate the church budget for year-end gifts, and we're just trying to figure out, like, when that stuff goes public, we know, okay? We keep a good tab on that. But some of you are here for technology reasons. Some of you are some of the few that actually grew up in the Bay Area. I think there are, between adults and kids, there are about 170 people at 9:30. 6 people grew up in the Bay Area, which is just crazy. If you grew up in the Bay Area, would you just raise your hand? Love just to, all right. So, of course, people who grew up in the Bay Area come to the 11 o'clock. About 10 hands went up, maybe a few more people in this room than were here at the last hour. Some of you just grew up here, and that's why you're here. We have a number of college students. Anybody in college or grad school or undergrad? Anybody? Yeah, keep those. That's awesome. We're so glad you guys are here and a part of this church. Some of you came to school here and never left. Is that anybody in the room? Like, you just came and this is really cool, and you just haven't left. Some of you came just because it's the cheapest place you could find. Is there anybody in the room? Yeah, it's like, Ben, it's just such a better bargain than the Midwest or the Southeast. So there's a host of reasons. A few of us moved here to start this church, and so that's kind of what brought us out. But what if those aren't the reasons why you're here? Maybe I should say it like this. What if those aren't the only reasons why you're here? What if God has a bigger purpose than just your job? I know, crazy. What if God has a bigger reason just that you love the climate? What if God has even a bigger reason than just because I grew up here? Like, this just makes sense. This is my home. What if there's a grander purpose? Because let me ask you this. How many of you believe that God does things with intention and purpose? Many of us. But here's what happens for quite a number of us. Here's what we do. We believe wholeheartedly that God does things with purpose, but somewhere there's a disconnect because we start to live our lives as though they're accidents. Like, of course God does things with purpose and intention, but I don't all the time. And the question I want to lead into is this. If God does things with purpose, and that includes us, shouldn't we try to align ourselves with that purpose? Shouldn't we try to figure it out? Because what I believe is it's got to be more than just your job that has you here. It's got to be. It's got to be more than just you love the climate. It's got to be more than just you love the density of the city. You love all of the things that happen because you're here in the Bay Area. I just think it's got to be more than that. And so what I want to build a case for, kind of in this shotgun, like just a quick rapid rifle way, I want to get us through some scriptures to build an argument for this reality that God is a sending God. That God is a sending God. I want to show you that, and here's how I want to show it to you. I want to show you, and this will sound like I've working on alliteration here, but I'm not. I just want to show you that what God does is he sends specific people to specific places for specific purposes, okay? And I would even, if we added a fourth one, it's not a P, if that bothers you. God also does those specific people to specific places for specific purposes at specific times. Okay? And what I want to do is I want to start with Genesis chapter 12 if you have a Bible. If you need one, raise your hand and we'll get one into your hands. I want to start with Genesis 12 where really this first activity of God becoming a sending God or showing us that he's a sending God shows up. Raise a hand if you need a Bible this morning and we'll get one into your hands. Page 6 if you have one of the epic Bibles that we pass out. For the rest of us, Genesis, first book of the Bible, chapter 12. Many of you know the story of Abraham, and what you may not know is that before his name was Abraham, his name was Abram. And everybody familiar with the song, Father Abraham? Like, that wasn't made up by some person on the internet, okay? Just so you know, there's a reason why that is what Abram or Abraham is referred to. And I want to show you where this first begins. If you would, stand with me. Genesis 12, verses 1, 2, and 3. I want you to see. This is really where in the scriptures and in history, God begins to show himself as a sending God. Then we'll rifle a few other scriptures on the screen after you have a seat. And I want to build a case, and then Shauna's going to do a great job of talking about how to live this way creatively and practically. Genesis 12, 1 through 3, it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram," he's about 75 years old here, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great," not period, comma, "so that you will be a blessing." There's his purpose. "I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." You may be seated. And the rest of it, I'll give you the scriptures on the screen. You can write down the reference, but for the sake of time, I want to make sure that we can get through, because I want to build this singular case that lets you know God's a sending God, that he sends specific people to specific places for a specific purpose, and really, he does this in specific times and at specific times. So I want to make sure that we build this case in a genuine and honest way. So Abram's 75 years old. God comes to this particular person and says, "I'm going to send you to a place." Now, if you know Abram's story at all, he doesn't tell him at first, and I know none of us are control freaks, so we would have no issue with God just going, "Hey, that direction," right? Now, sometimes we get lost around the city like that, right? I'm just going to go this way. Got my phone to bail me out if I get in trouble. But for Abram, he just says, "Go, and I'll show you where I want you to end up," essentially. And so Abram goes, but he doesn't say that I just want to bless you, Abram. The blessing, the sending, doesn't terminate on your joy. I'm blessing you. I'm sending you to be a blessing. That's his purpose, that he would become a father to many nations, so that all of the Jews ultimately and eventually would be blessed because Abraham was sent by God to do something. Well, as time goes along, you see God's doing some unique things. We just finished a series on Joseph, and you may remember that. And where the story of Joseph ends is Joseph is in Egypt, and while Joseph is in Egypt, his family comes, and they begin to live in Egypt, and all of a sudden, you have generations and generations of Israelites living in Egypt. Well, the Pharaoh that Joseph worked for, he retired or died off one day, and so this new Pharaoh comes to power, and he realizes something. He realizes that soon the Israelites are going to overtake us Egyptians. We need to do something about this. So he sets up taskmasters. He makes all of the Israelites slaves, and he puts them to work. And this doesn't happen for a decade. It happens for hundreds and hundreds of years. One day, their cry reaches God, and God wants to do something. God has a purpose to do something about it. And understand this, when God, throughout history, when he wants to do something purposeful, he sends people to do it. Let me show you what happens in Exodus chapter 3, verse 10, what God's response is. It's not, "Come, I'm going to just take Pharaoh out." It's not, "I'm going to snap my fingers and then release the Israelites from slavery." Here's what he says to Moses. He says, "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." When God has a purpose, when there's something on God's heart, he can snap his fingers. He does that sometimes. But what history is full of, what the scriptures are full of, what you and I've seen in our lifetime is full of, God sends people to accomplish his purpose. He's purposeful. He's intentional. We believe God wanted a church to start here in San Francisco. But we believe God wanted to send people to start it. As God puts things on your heart, as he can do things with a snap of a finger or the spoken word. We know that. He's created the world like this. But he can do things in a moment without using us, but he finds great delight in sending us to accomplish a thing that's heavy on his heart. Esther, eventually, she becomes queen one day in Susa. And what happens is Esther thinks, like most of us would think, I'm only here to be queen, right? This is why God has me here. It's the equivalent of us saying, God has me here for my job only. God has me here because I love this place only. God has me here just to be awesome in San Francisco only. But she has a relative, like many of us need, a friend or relative in her life named Mordecai, who's willing to challenge her along the lines of this reality that God's a sending God and that he sends people into certain things at specific times with purpose. And he says to her this on the eve of her Jews, she was a Jew, all the Jews, there was an edict signed that all the Jews were going to be annihilated. They were going to be murdered. So Mordecai comes to Esther, who's the queen, and he's like, Esther, you've not been sent here accidentally. And he helps her realize perhaps why she's here. Look at Esther chapter 4, verse 14. Mordecai says this to her. He says, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. He's saying to her, God's going to do his thing. But it'll happen outside of your lifetime. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come or have been sent, if you want to use that language, whether you have not been sent to the kingdom for such a time as this. Mordecai helps her have the kind of aha moment that you and I need to have this morning. Wait a minute. What if I'm not just here for school? What if I'm not just here for my job? What if I'm not just here to be a part of this church? What if there's something bigger that God's up to in my life? What if that's true like it was for Abraham and Moses and Esther? And what you find is all throughout the scriptures, God doesn't start doing anything randomly. It seems like it, right? It seems like it. As you go along, you see the prophet Jonah, and what God has for Jonah is this call to be sent to the city of Nineveh. Have you ever been sent by God somewhere you didn't want to be? Anybody? Don't name it, just raise your hand. This is Jonah's story. The reason you and I know the belly of the well kind of part of the story is because he's put in the belly of the well because Jonah doesn't want to go where God's sending him. But God in his compassion and grace, which Jonah knew, God wanted to do something in Nineveh. He wanted people in Nineveh, just like he wants people in San Francisco, to know of his love, mercy, grace, and compassion. So he sends Jonah again, Jonah chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, a particular place, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. Now, the way this Jonah ends, it's a great read if you haven't read the Old Testament account of Jonah, about 4 chapters, great story, but how it ends is Jonah's upset that God's going to have compassion on Nineveh. He throws a pity party because he knows what God is like. We believe if God has sent us here, and I mean the collective us, not just Shauna and I, the collective us, if he sent us here, then he has some purpose he wants to accomplish for us here. Here. If he sent you somewhere else, you need to leave. I mean, not like if he sent you here right now, I want you to be with us, but if he hasn't, you need to get quickly to the place he sent you to. If it's not San Francisco, awesome, but go to the place where he has for you. And sometimes, I know many conversations with you guys, it's this continual journey of, does God have us here still, or is he leading us somewhere else? And we need to contemplate those things, but we can say unequivocally that God is a sending God. It seems like you ended up here on accident. You haven't. Some of you, God has sent here so that you might hear about the love of Christ. You never expected that to be San Francisco. Some of you weren't a part of a church. You actually left the Bible Belt where there's a church on every corner and never expected to find Jesus here in the middle of downtown San Francisco, right? You all probably hoped you wouldn't, right? And some of you have, and it's been incredible to hear your story and to see what God has done. Well, when you get into the New Testament, which coincides with the first century and Jesus coming on the scene, and then you have Paul doing this ministry, he starts churches and makes disciples in strategic cities around Asia. And Paul, he goes to specific places that God sends him to do a specific thing, and then he moves on because he concludes that God has sent him somewhere else. And then Paul does this really cool thing throughout the book of Acts. There are sometimes, it wasn't that he heard God calling him to specific places, so he would just kind of name a place. He thought he had he had the freedom of God to go towards that place, and here's what he found out. This is really cool. When God didn't want him to be there and his heart was right, God would stop him from going. God can do that. Sometimes God just gives us a green light. Sometimes it's not this city. Sometimes it can be there or there, but there's a purpose there or there, wherever that is. God has purpose for us, and we need to lean in and recognize that. And then perhaps the biggest sending God ever did was when he sent Jesus. Let me give you this from Galatians chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. In Galatians chapter 4, verses 4 and 5, Paul's writing to the Galatians, and he's talking to them about how God sends. And he says, but when the fullness of time had come, so what he's saying is when it was game time, He doesn't do things purposefully at random times. He does things purposefully at purposeful times, okay? When the fullness of time had come, when game time was on the eternal horizon, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we, that's us in this room included, might receive adoption as sons and certainly daughters. When the time had come, when the fullness of time had come, at just the right moment, when it was game time, when God saw it. Remember, he did this with Moses when he sent him to Pharaoh. They had been enslaved a long time, but for whatever reason, something crossed the line, and God's like, now. In the cosmos, when he's looking down throughout eternity, there comes a moment in time, Paul says, when the fullness of time had come, and God knew his plan all along was to send Jesus to redeem us. Aren't you glad? There's a moment in which the timeline crosses the specific place in history, and God's like, now. And he does the same thing with us. He does the same thing with us. Shauna and I didn't need to start this church 10 years ago. It's not what God had for us 10 years ago. And he had us purposefully doing what we were doing there, but he was also preparing us for this moment. So when he brought this freedom and call into our hearts, we went for it. And some of us need to learn the concept of living sent this morning. Others of us know we've been sent for a particular thing and we're just not doing it. Let me tell you what else Jesus said. John chapter 17, it's known as the high priestly prayer of Jesus. One of the last prayers Jesus ever prayed, that's recorded at least before he went to the cross. And here's what he said, just in verse 18. I'll give you just a little piece of that. He said this, speaking to God the Father, he said, as you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. Them is his disciples, but it's also us this morning. He says, as God has sent me, he's like, I know, God, you've sent me. You're sending God. As you've sent me, so I send them. Now, the question might be, like, Ben, how do we know what we've been sent for? I don't know that we can handle that this week, but I do know this. It will be in line with what God's wanting to accomplish, okay? Does God want you to enjoy your time here in San Francisco? Absolutely. God's not a killjoy. Absolutely he does. But he just doesn't want it to end on you, right? He did not say to Abram, I'm going to bless you, period. What did he say? I'm going to bless you. I'm going to send you so that you will be a blessing. And so the question you and I need to ask is, okay, God, it can't just be that you've sent me here for a job. Why have you sent me? Now, my hope is that God has sent you here for a long time. In fact, I'll only be your friend if you sign a 2-year commitment. Seriously. 2 years, that's an eternity here, right? It's like every 6 months, people are rolling in and out. I hope it's here for a long term, but if you aren't in the wrong place today, then he's at least sent you here for now. We tend to think, well, we'll live purposefully or we'll live sent when we get out of grad school, when we get the dream job, when we go back home, when we have, when we're married, when we have kids, some of you when you have grandkids, some of us, we'll live what God wants us to live when we retire. Some of us go that route. What I want to say to you, God has purpose behind why you have breath in your lungs today. There's a reason you live in 2013 here in San Francisco or wherever you live as opposed to some other year, some other century, and some other place. And even if we only get to this point this morning, let's at least get to this point. God, what are you up to? I know you don't do things accidentally. I know you don't sort of just throw a dart with your eyes closed at a map and send me there. So God, I'm here purposefully, and it can't just be for this job, this school, this neighborhood, this pleasure, this fun, even this church. God didn't just send us here to plant a church. God sent us here for the neighbors that we're able to engage, for the classmates that our kids have at school, for the boys that I get to coach in Little League, for the moms that Shauna gets to influence around the city. He doesn't do things accidentally. So let's begin to embrace and lean in and ask the question, why here, God? Why now? If he's got you somewhere else, ask that about that place. Well, to get practical, because I don't really know that too much, I want to have Shauna because I think she does a better job on this subject matter than any person I know, at least in a personal way. And so teach us just how do we do this creatively? How do we do it practically? And then give them some of the ideas that you've seen be powerful in our lives, while at the same time realizing we don't always get it right.
Well, now that Ben has helped establish for us that God is a sending God, why has he sent us here? And he even talked about just the many reasons of why you live in San Francisco. But beyond the obvious of making a living, and for the kids in this room or the parents of kids, beyond the obvious that you're here because your mom and dad brought you here, why are we here? Because I believe for the kids in this room and parents, the purpose for kids is just as important for living in San Francisco as it is for you parents. I think God sending us here is very reflective of the scriptures. I love that God sent the exiles into Babylon. They didn't haphazardly end up there or were gluttons for punishment. We don't have to feel sorry for them as we read their story. And to be honest, most people don't feel sorry for you when they learn that you live in San Francisco, right? There have been a few people that have come to San Francisco to visit, and after they see the city, they pity us because they think we're doing one of the hardest things ever by living here. But you and I know that when we are sent and we live sent, being here is an absolute joy. A crazy joy at times, but a joy. I grew up memorizing Jeremiah 29:11. Some of you know it by heart. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. But I memorized it in the context of happiness and health. But if you look at it in its context, God was telling the Israelites, hey, I know you're in exile in Babylon. I sent you there. But while you're living in a city that is not your home, in a city that has very different foundational beliefs, stay there, live at peace with those around you, and keep at the center that I am your God. I'm often telling the boys as I take them to school in the morning that they are ambassadors today. They get to give laughter and give knowledge and give help and give kindness to their teachers and classmates. But for me, when I answer this question, I take you back with me 4 years ago when we were trying to decide if we were going to plant a church in the city or in the suburbs. And I remember 6 of us being in a minivan, and we pulled off into an industrial park down near San Jose, and we all began to chime in for what we believe God was telling us. And for me, mine wasn't very deep, and I've learned to appreciate that that God keeps it very simple with me. But for me, it was just the reality of we were going to live in a tight space with lots of people and numerous cultures, and that would be a daily reminder as to why we lived here. And also for our kids, them living here with us, they would have purpose in living here beyond the fact that, of course, they had to come with us. I love this insight from Tim Keller. I know Ben quotes him a lot. I'm going to quote him today. And the quote is this: cities have more of the image of God per square inch than any other place on earth. His reasoning here is that human beings are who Christ came for, and there are more human beings living in the city from sheer number, then cities are very important. This makes San Francisco very important. So God is a sending God. God has purpose for you and I living here beyond the obvious. So then how do we do this practically and creatively? If I may take liberty with Jeremiah 29:5-6 that Ben used as the text for last week, God might not be telling us to build houses, but to rent and buy. And planting gardens look more like probably an herb garden here in the city, or buying locally. And if I may, for verse 6, God is saying, ask the girl out, get married, have babies or adopt or foster, and raise a family here. Ben always jokes that he's got a side business of matchmaking, but I'm free of charge, and I work a whole lot faster than he does.
College fund, but
It won't. Well, maybe as I build my clientele, I'll start charging. But all of this to say, those verses, and I'll reference that again so you can go back and look at it, but it's Jeremiah 29:5-6. These verses are packed with how we live sent practically and creatively. Another verse I want to reference is Jeremiah 33:9. This has become a verse that I pray for over our city. And this city shall be to me a name of joy, a praise and a glory before all the nations of the earth, who shall hear of all the good I do for them. They shall fear and tremble because of all the good and all the prosperity I provide for it. We, of all people, should love the city that God has us in. We learn to love our city when we know our city more. And we know our city more by engaging our city. I could ask all of you what you've done this weekend to engage your city. whether it's been you've gone on a run or you've played in the parks, or you ran a marathon, or you ate at a local restaurant, or you bought something local, or you met up with neighbors. But in our time left, and I want you to jot these down if you're note takers, and these are going to be some great things to discuss as a small group this week or in your circle of friends. But I want to give you 3 creative strategies for living sent here in the city. Number 1, invite others in, invite others out. And here's what I mean by this. Have people over to your place, to your apartment, even if it means you got to crowd around and sit around the coffee table in the living room. But invite others in and then invite others out. Meet up at a restaurant. Meet up for coffee. I'm sure all of us could come up with a substantial list of people that we could do life with here in building friendships and sharing meals. One day last week, Glenda, who works at the front desk here at 543 Howard, her and I just grabbed lunch quickly on a Tuesday. I think for Thanksgiving this year, we've got 20 people coming over to fill up our table to celebrate Thanksgiving, inviting others in, inviting others out. I want to share a statistic with you regarding international students here in cities in the United States. And we have many international students here and that serve at Epic weekly. But 75% of them will return back to their home countries, never stepping foot in an American home. 85% of them will return back to their home countries, never stepping foot inside a church. Now, we can change this statistic, especially here in San Francisco, with a simple invite, having them over into your home, inviting them in to church. Now, in order to do this, we have to clear the calendar, and we have to say no to other things if we're going to invite people into our lives. So I want to leave you with this question for this point. Who will you invite in this week? And who will you invite out? Number 2, build a family here. Okay, I'm done talking about getting married and having babies. I'm going to let the Holy Spirit take that one from here. But I do want to challenge you with building a family out of friends. Our kids have more aunts and uncles and cousins here because we live so far from family. When friends become family, you'll begin to see yourselves here longer than expected. When friends become family and you experience life together, you create memories. And you're already thinking of some of those memories you've already created living here. But those memories become links or become roots. And they become links to the city and to the people of the city. Also, another way to build a family here is to attach yourself to a small group that's doing life together. I can call my family and my friends back east and tell them about life here, but they don't fully get it because they're not in the day-to-day. In San Francisco, we understand each other because we're all smelling the same stuff on the streets, right? We're all cheering for the same sports team. Well, most of us. Some people are nudging others. And we're all interacting with the same culture. So the question out of this point is, who's becoming family to you the longer that you live here? And the third point is bless this city. San Francisco should be prayed for daily by this group of people. The church should be praying for the city. God, in the passages that we've looked at last week and today in Jeremiah, God instructs the Israelites to pray for Babylon. For me, the best place to do this is when I am sandwiched on the train or the bus and I can't even reach in to grab my iPhone to see if I'd gotten any messages or to play a game. It's also the same when I'm walking down the sidewalks and there's nothing else I should be doing while I'm walking. So praying while you're in transit, while you're walking the sidewalks, be praying for this city. And you can just, even as you make eye contact, sometimes I feel like I should wear a shirt that just says, just smile. As you walk along the sidewalks and you're looking into the faces of the people, you can see the depressed and the lonely and the hurting and those that seem like they never stop speed walking down the sidewalks. But we can be praying for those people as we make eye contact with them on a daily basis. Another thing is to, like I said, be praying Jeremiah 33:9 over our city, that this city will be to God a praise and a glory. Because remember, Matthew tells us we are the light of the world. We are the salt of the earth. We have a message to proclaim in our words and our actions. And we will bless the city when we rise above the goodwill that's already taking place. You and I both know that San Franciscans take care of the earth. They help the homeless. We're doing a great job as a city. But the way God will bless this city is when we do so in the name of Jesus and for him. And the best part of all of this is that we simply get to live like Christ asked us to, but in a really amazing place that is both broken and beautiful at the same time. Now, while you're living sent, people are going to be attracted to your lifestyle and life choices. These are the ones that are the easiest to talk to, the no-brainers. They're easy to talk to because they're curious. By all means, share your story, what you enjoy doing here in this city, how you're contributing and settling in, where you go to church. But then at the same time, as you are living sent, there are going to be people who are not attracted to your lifestyle and life choices, who are a little uncomfortable sometimes being around you. But you need to know that even though you might not be able to have conversations with this group, they are still watching how you work, how you live, how you serve, and how you parent. Now, I want to throw out a disclaimer here because I realize that we're a ministry family. We moved to San Francisco to start a church and to invest in this city. And some of you might be thinking, well, of course Ben and Shauna are going to challenge us to do this. It comes so natural for them. That is not the case. I have found myself on a soccer field at one of our boys' practices and was in a conversation with a mom, and we began to talk about what we believed, and she stopped me and she said, Shauna, I know about God, but who is this Jesus you're talking about? I've been on the playground at school, and I'm introducing myself to a family that just moved here from Japan, and as we began to dialogue about what our husbands do, she asked me if Ben wore a priestly robe. That would be awesome. He'd look good in one.
So much time in the closet anymore.
It's true. It's true. But there are times when I'm in conversation and it gets challenging or I feel inadequate. Many times I put our family out on the line when we host something for our neighbors, wondering if anyone is going to show up. This past Easter, we had an egg hunt. No one showed up. This summer, Sam made homemade ice cream, and we did an ice cream social on our street, and 6 people showed up. Last Christmas, we did cocoa and cookies. Everyone on our street showed up, and we had neighbors who have lived there twice as long as we have, introducing themselves to each other. But I want to tell you this. We want to be a family, to the best of our ability, that models a godly marriage and a godly family and a godly home. We want to live sent to lead you. We're going to mess up. We already have. Even now, we're in the midst of discerning a cultural issue with our kids. But as we commit ourselves to this church and to this city, we're committing ourselves to you. Ben and I, with our kids, we want to be a family, and we want to be part of a church that encourages you to stay and engage the city with us. And I want to close with this challenge. Our 3 kids go to school with over 500 kids whose parents are doing life here. And by doing life here, they're accepting the challenge of raising a family here. You and I know city life brings challenges, right? Go back to the day you moved here and unpacking or trying to get the truck lined up with the loading dock so you could load everything. And then you're getting a parking ticket for parking in the wrong place, even though you needed to unload. Is this bringing back memories? City life brings challenges. But as Christians, let me bring this even up a notch. Living sent brings challenges. But we have to remember who has called us. But here's the challenge. Instead of us looking to the city at how to face challenges of living here, let's reverse this. And let's have people in the city looking at us, the church, as people of the church, and how do we face the challenges. We as Christians should be showing our city how to invite others in and others out. We should be leading the way in how we bless this city and how we build a family here. Ben has shared this concept before, that we should be living out our faith in such a way that demands God's supernatural power to show up and move. San Francisco needs to see radical, Jesus-inspired generosity and love. Are you trusting in the same amazing God for you and your family, you and your spouse, you and your small group to see life change happen in this city? Sink your roots here. This city is going to be a much better place if we do. Because I believe this. We, this group in here, we of all people should laugh the loudest, give the most, and love better than anyone else in this city.
That's great. I know many of you know the great wisdom from Shauna just on a personal basis, so it's such an honor for our church at large to hear from her, and she lives this out. This is not just like, hey, I wish you would do this. It's like, hey, we're learning, and it's been a challenge for us. And sometimes I know what I'm here to do, and so I'm like, really, I'd rather just hang out at my house by myself tonight. And you should do that at times, but really to help me engage our city and to think. We're all engaged in other people's lives, likely. We're around people. The question is, are we doing so with intent and purpose? So I want to leave you with 3 questions before we move into a communion time. The first question is this: where has God sent you? Where has God sent you? If it's not here, think about that place. But if it is here, where has he sent you? Why has he sent you here? Randomly, coincidentally, accidentally, or with purpose? And then the big one is, a lot of times we know what to do, right? The big one is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? As we move into this time of communion, what I want to do is, every time we have communion, which is about once a month, I want to set the stage for that moment and that experience through the lens of what we've talked about. I think if I ever give a message up here that can't fit with communion, then I've given the wrong message. And so today, really what I want to do is think through this lens of God being ascending God as we taste the elements this morning. As you taste the bread that represents the broken body of Jesus, and you dip it into the cup of juice representing the blood of Jesus, I want you just to thank him that he was sent on your behalf. And if you've never entered into a relationship with Jesus, that's available for you today as well. Some of you, it's not that you're sent here by God so that you might become a messenger first and primarily, but so that you might receive the message he has for you. A message of grace and forgiveness, a message of hope. Some of you came to San Francisco to run away from stuff. You're never expecting to find God in a whole lot more, but you have. And maybe you've never experienced the communion elements. Basically what will happen in a minute, I will pray, and the band will come back and do a couple of songs, and we're not in a rush this morning. Let's proactively think about what it is we're doing. And some of us just need to get our hearts right with God. You're a Christian, but you know what? There's a lot of sin in your heart. You've been living for self. You've got these idols that you really need to dethrone. And just to say to God, God, I confess that I've made other things much more important than you. Maybe you weren't a Christian, at least when you came into the room, but you've heard the message that God has sent Jesus to redeem us, and you want to embrace that by faith this morning. You can do that. Just repent of your sin before God and ask Jesus' sacrifice that we're about to celebrate to make itself evident in your own heart and life. Whatever you need to do, you can stand and silently and pray. You can kneel near your seat. You can just sit there until you're ready. But when you're ready, you can go along on this section. You can go that way. We'll make a line along this wall. This section can go right down here. And the band will lead us in a couple of songs. We're not in a rush, but we want to believe 2 things as we take communion this morning. We want to thank God for his gift of sending Jesus and that Jesus was sent for us. But let's also, same side of the coin, or the other side of the coin is this question. Okay, God, you sent Jesus for me. Who have you sent me for? What have you sent me for? Why am I here? And I think sometimes God is just pleased when we start asking the question long before we even discover an answer at times. So let's pray and let's just thank him and let's ask this question. Why are we here?